I slammed into the steering wheel to avoid another move from the car chasing me. The first shot shattered the windshield as it pierced the body of the car. It was night, and a full moon was high in the sky, but the road to my home was much darker than usual. My heart was pounding like crazy, and my blood was rushing in my ears. Just a few minutes ago, I was thinking about how I would explain to Lisa why I was home late. Now all I could think about was how to avoid getting shot in the back at the end of the day. The car behind kept a steady pace, its headlights off, only the flickering gunfire on the window outlining the silhouette of the pursuers. They knew I was their target. "Relax, Paul," I told myself, keeping my body low to avoid being an easy target. My right hand reached for the glove box, as usual. Damn, this wasn't my usual car. My gun wasn't here. The woods along the road seemed to be my only hope. I swerved the wheel and drove into a narrow dirt road. The tires screamed, the car lurched violently, and I slumped into my seat, trying to keep control. The pursuers slowed down, clearly not expecting me to risk entering such undergrowth. I muttered, "Just hang on a little longer." But then I heard the sound of a low engine coming from the trees. There were two of them. I jumped out of the car and managed to park it on the edge of a cliff. I took out my phone and sent a text message. *initiate security protocol. My life is in danger. Sending location. 30 seconds later, my car was already on fire. I hid behind a tree and watched as the two men in black jumped out of their car. They checked the scene, but I had already ducked into the depths of the forest, behind a thick spruce tree. They weren't looking for ordinary people, but for people who hadn't forgotten their skills. I clenched my fists. I needed to find out who they were, what they wanted, and why they were after me. But one thing was certain. My peaceful life was over. I made my way through the forest, ducking and hiding, trying to be quieter than the night wind. The skills honed over decades came back to me like a reflex. I listened carefully to every sound, recognizing the crunch of branches under their feet. They walked back and forth along the path, searching the area. "Where is he?" one of them said irritably, his voice low and hoarse. "His car was burned, but there's no one there." "He must be around here somewhere," said another voice, deep and hoarse, with a slight accent, coming from a tall, confident-sounding man. I fumbled in my pocket and found the weapon I'd carried with me since my retirement, a pocket knife. The years of quiet life in the private sector had not made me complacent. I took up a position on a small hill and watched them. They spread out and searched the area. It was important to keep them apart. The first came straight towards me through the undergrowth. I waited until he was close, then pounced behind him. The knife made a light cut across his ribs. His body went limp, and I gently laid him on the ground. "Are you there?" the other one shouted when he heard a noise. "Yes, I'm checking," I said, imitating the dead man's voice. He fell silent, believing me. I moved closer to where the shadows of the trees were shifting. Tom was playing against me. I knew that if I didn't settle them now, reinforcements would arrive even faster, and I hadn't figured out who was behind this yet. I circled around and approached him from the other side. He was standing with his back to me, nervously looking around. It would take just one move to subdue him, to strangle him until he fainted. I put him against the tree and quickly searched his pockets. A mobile phone, with an unfinished text message on the screen. *target eliminated. Location coordinates. I close my eyes and try to process what I've seen. They're looking for me, but not for theft or simple murder. This is targeted elimination, and it's coming from someone who knows too much about me. I take out my phone and activate the encrypted communication line. Rick, it's Paul. I'm in trouble. Someone knows more about me than they should. Send someone to check the database for leaks. The phone rang. Paul, are you okay? The voice on the other end of the line sounded surprised, but quickly regained its composure. We're on our way. The coordinates have been received. Do you have a place to hide? We're almost there. We'll discuss the rest in person, I said and hung up. The forest was silent, as if it too was waiting for my next move. I had to act. As I emerged from the forest and walked over to my old car, which I had left behind just in case, the goal of Lisa and my peaceful life in the suburbs was already looming before me. What had happened couldn't have been a coincidence. Lisa. I frowned and thought about her recent quirks. The always busy phone, the attempts to hide text messages, and the sudden desire for privacy that she had never complained about before. When I got home and pulled into the garage, everything was as usual. The house was brightly lit. Lisa was sitting in the kitchen drinking tea. "You're home late," she said with a smile when she saw me. "Business," I replied, trying not to give away too much. She got up and came over, giving me a hug. "Are you tired?" I detect a faint whiff of someone else's perfume. "Very tired. I need to rest." Her hands tremble slightly as she helps me straighten my shirt. I know I'll figure it out, but for now, she doesn't need to know that I already have. I go upstairs to the bedroom and leave Lisa in the kitchen. She hums to herself, but the sound is strained. At the bedroom door, I linger, listening. Footsteps. She enters the living room, then silence. I went into the bedroom, but didn't turn on the light and collapsed on the bed. I pulled out my phone and called Rick again via the encrypted line. "Rick, I need to do a background check. Everything on Lisa, phone calls, emails, activities for the past 6 months, and find out who owns a car with the license plate number of these." I dictated the license plate number of the stalker's car that I had memorized. "Roger, Paul, are you sure you want to know this?" Rick paused. "This is about your personal life." "It's not the first time for me, Rick. You know me. You do as you're told. Hang in there, mate. They'll figure it out." I hung up the phone and slowly unclenched my fist. Even after all these years, I was still playing this game. As the saying goes, old habits die hard. In the morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly calm. Lisa made breakfast as if nothing had happened, but I could feel her smile was forced. "Did you have a good weekend?" she asked me across the table. "Very good," I said, meeting her gaze. "And you?" "I'm fine. Work is a bit tiring," she said, smiling and avoiding my gaze. My phone in my pocket vibrated. After a short pause, I opened the message from Rick. "Your wife has connected with the facility. Call details. Meeting tonight. Proceed with caution advised." I felt a coldness in my chest, but I tried not to show it. "Are you going out tonight?" I asked casually. "Just around town. I'm meeting Marina at a cafe," she replied, getting up to clear the table. "Great. I'll work from home then. I have a few things to take care of." She nodded and kissed me before I left. As the door closed behind her, I sat down at my computer and started opening the saved files in the database that were still accessible. Rick had sent me a list of her calls. One number appeared too often. I knew that number. It belonged to a man I had worked with before I retired. His name was Carl. Carl was a troublemaker. That night, I met Rick in a small bar on the outskirts of town. "Things are worse than I thought," he said, handing me a folder full of information. "Your Carl is up to something big. Apparently, he works for a private company that specializes in getting rid of people who get in the way. Your name has come up in their conversations a number of times over the past 3 weeks. They want to get rid of me because I know too much," I said as I leafed through the documents. "And Lisa? She's involved too. Maybe manipulated, maybe threatened, but she's clearly hiding something. She meets with Carl. She gives him things, or receives things." I closed the folder and looked at Rick. "They don't know I'm still me. Paul, will you tell her the truth?" "Not yet, but I'll use the opportunity." I stand up and put the folder under my jacket. "We'll work out a plan, Rick. We always do." Lisa comes in late. The smell of someone else's expensive perfume lingers on her jacket. She tries to smile, but I can see her shoulders tense and her fingers tremble as she tries to undo her scarf. "You're late," I said, sitting on the sofa in the dark room. My voice was cold as steel. She was taken aback, not expecting me to be here. Marina wants to talk to you. She's had a rough day." I slowly got up and put my phone in my pocket. "It's been a busy day." What a convenient excuse. Every time I start asking questions, you say you've had a rough day. Lisa continued to take off her jacket, frowning, but her hands were shaking. "Paul, what's with the tone? Do you suspect me?" I took a step forward, and her eyes glanced towards the door as if she wanted to escape. "Suspect? No, I already know everything." Her eyes widened, but she quickly pulled herself together and tried to look confident. "What do you know, Paul? You're acting really strange." "Carl, Lisa. I know about Carl. I know you met in the restaurant. I know how you handed him the file. I know you lied to me while we were living under the same roof." She took a step back and shook her head. "Paul, it's not what you think." I snorted and pulled out my phone. A photo appeared on the screen. Lisa and Carl sitting at a table, an envelope in their hands. "Really? What is that? Did you exchange recipes? Maybe he taught you how to bake a pie." "Paul, it's hard to explain." "Damn it, Lisa," I shouted, and she took a step back, her hands gripping the back of the chair. "This was your plan, wasn't it? Did you think I was a burden? Or did you just go along with his wishes because he promised you a new life?" Her eyes were brimming with tears, but I didn't slow down at all. "Lisa, you've lived with me for 20 years. All this time, you've always thought of me as just an ordinary guy, right? Someone who works from morning to night just to give you a secure life." "Paul, that's not what I meant. Shut up." I shouted, and she froze. "You don't know who you're messing with." I pulled a token out of my pocket and threw it on the table. The metal token clanged on the tabletop. "Paul Grayson, intelligence officer, codename Phoenix, a retired man who now lives with a woman who has decided to sell him for a little money." Her lips trembled. She slumped in her chair as if she had been struck. "You have been lying to me?" I leaned in close to her and looked her straight in the eye. "I lied to protect you. And you, Lisa, you betrayed me. You betrayed me. For what? For his beautiful promises? Or were you afraid that he would kill you?" She tried to answer, but I interrupted her. "No more excuses. You have crossed the line. I promise you, Carl will soon realize that he underestimated me. And you." I straightened up and backed towards the door. You'll learn what it means to betray someone. As I walked out of the room, her face was a picture of horror, and there was dead silence. I heard the sound of hurried footsteps behind me. Lisa wasn't going to let this go. Is that it, Paul? You think you can just walk away? Her voice was shrill, almost taunting. You're ridiculous. An intelligence officer? You, Paul? I stood in the doorway and turned to look at her. Her face was contorted with anger mixed with fear, which in turn was disguised as contempt. You've been a coward your whole life, she continued, taking a step towards me. You've always hidden behind your eyes, for my family, for your meaningless antics. You think those spy stories scare me? She snorted in contempt. Even now, you won't do anything. I didn't answer, just stared coldly at her. Years of training, dozens of operations, it all came in handy now. My silence, my gaze, seemed to strike her harder than any words ever could. She tried to continue, but stuttered. Her lips trembled, and something she wanted to hide flashed in her eyes. Fear. Do you really think anyone would believe you? She muttered, not quite convinced. You've always been a nobody. And now? I strode towards her, and she instinctively backed away, almost tripping over her chair. Lisa, I said softly, as if savoring her name. You have no idea who you're living with. She froze, pressed against the back of the sofa. You don't want to believe me? Fine. But when Carl disappears and your friends realize they've messed with the wrong person, you'll be the first to pay the price. Her breathing became rapid, but she was still trying to save face. You won't do anything, Paul. She forced out a weak smile as she managed to say. You can't. You're not the right person. I leaned close to her ear, and when she heard my calm, cold voice, she almost screamed. You'll find out who I am. I walked out of the house and made my way to my SUV. Lisa stayed inside, but I knew she was already trembling with fear. She was in no mood to be ridiculed right now. In the car, I switched on my laptop and opened encrypted communication. Rick was online immediately. Paul, what's wrong? It's Lisa. She knows more than she's saying. She's not afraid of Carl, but she is afraid of me. I want you to find out who else is involved. You think she's part of a bigger plan? I don't think she even knows what trouble she's in, but I'll find out. Rick was silent for a moment, then spoke. There's another problem. Carl has already got information from some of your former subordinates. Some of them have disappeared. I gripped the steering wheel. Someone has leaked the data. Yes, and this person knows what they're doing. Find the leaker, I ordered, and send me all the data. That evening, I returned home as if nothing had happened. Lisa was lying in bed, but I knew she was awake. She was having trouble breathing, which betrayed her true thoughts. Sleep well, Lisa, I whispered, lying down next to her. She didn't answer, but I could feel her shaking. The next day, I discovered that Carl had made an appointment. He thought I would take action first, but he didn't realize that he was already trapped. Carl kept his appointment. He was confident until he heard me appear behind him. You shouldn't have touched my family, Carl. He turned around, but instead of seeing horror, I saw a sneer on his face. Paul, don't you understand? I'm not the one after you. It's her. Carl shows me a photo on his phone. It's Lisa. She's smiling next to someone I know well, the former director of intelligence. My heart sinks. Welcome to the new game, Grayson, Carl says, putting his phone away. The rules have changed. I stand across from Carl, trying to process what I've heard. Is Lisa working against me? All those years of her smiles, her kind words, was it all a lie? Are you saying that my wife is in league with you? I hissed, holding back my anger. Carl grinned and took a step back. No, Paul. She's not in league with me. The work is more interesting. You could say we're just on the same side. I narrowed my eyes. You didn't realize this right away, did you? At that moment, a sharp pain shot through my temples. I felt dizzy, as if someone had suddenly yanked the carpet out from under my feet. I stumbled and grabbed a chair. Paul. Carl tilted his head like a predator had spotted its prey. Is there a problem? Go away, I muttered, trying not to fall over. But he didn't. He was staring at me, as if expecting something. The world around me began to blur, and I slumped into the chair. My heart was pounding. Paul, Carl shook his head. You need to trust your wife more. She knows how to finish what you started. I looked up, but my eyes were already blurry. What have you done to me? Carl laughed. Not me, my friend. Your Lisa is the real master. She did it, slowly and carefully. The dosage was so small that you would have thought it was due to old age. I clenched my teeth and gathered my last strength. You won't get away with this. I already have, he said as he turned to leave. Good night, Paul. If you live to see the morning. I don't remember how I made it out of the building. The world seemed to be rocking in a storm, as if I were on the deck of a ship. My hands trembled, my legs trembled, but my instincts were still working. I activated the panic button on the watch I'd been wearing since the beginning of my career. It wasn't just an accessory. A second later, I got Rick's call. Paul, what's wrong? His voice was harsh. I've been poisoned. Lisa, I interrupted him, trying to concentrate. Find me. I'll be right there. Hang on. I blacked out and fell to the ground, closing my eyes. When I woke up, the light was too strong for my eyes to adjust to. The smell of alcohol and drugs filled the air. Rick's voice came from a distance. Damn it, Paul. You almost died. Where am I? I tried to sit up. Rick appeared at my side immediately. You're in our clinic. We've checked. She's been poisoning your food and drink in very small doses to make it look like chronic pain or age-related problems. I nodded slowly, trying to clear my thoughts. How long has this been going on? Apparently for over a year, maybe 2. I trembled with anger. She knew what she was doing. She was waiting for me to get weak. Her plan backfired. We found you in time. But Paul, Rick stopped. And that was just the beginning. Carl, he's dead. So is Lisa. I clenched my fists and felt more anger than I had in years. They all think they've won, but they don't even realize they've just started a war. Lying in my hospital room, I stared at the ceiling and fell into thought. How long had she been planning this? Had Lisa been part of a larger plot from the beginning, or had she been recruited later? I trusted her, loved her, and she used that against me. Deep down, a feeling I had long buried resurfaced. The pain of betrayal mingled with cold determination. She wanted to weaken me and make me helpless, but she forgot who I was, and that I knew how to turn weakness into strength. Despite my body's protests, I slowly got to my feet. Paul, what are you doing? Rick stood in the doorway. Getting back in the game, I said, putting on my old jacket. This is personal. The next day, I hit the road. My goal was clear. Carl and Lisa had not only betrayed me, they were part of something much bigger, and the truth had to be found. Rick said there was only one person who could help me now, and I knew exactly who he meant. Paul, are you sure you want to involve her? He asked as he walked me to the helicopter. She's the best, I answered as I fastened my seatbelt. If anyone knows how to clean up this mess, it's her. Okay, here are her coordinates. Paul, remember, she will do anything for you. Don't forget that. I didn't say anything. There was a tremor deep in my soul, but I didn't have time to think about the past. Laura sat in a small cafe on the outskirts of Berlin, watching the passers-by. She always chose places like this, quiet and inconspicuous. She was in her 40s, but looked younger. She was tall and slim, with an elegant bearing that betrayed a discipline. Her dark hair was tied into a low ponytail, and she wore light makeup that set off her expressive green eyes. She looked the same as the last time we worked together. She noticed me immediately as I walked over to her. Her gaze softened, and the corners of her mouth twitched slightly, revealing a warm, almost imperceptible smile. Paul, you can always find me in the most unexpected places, she said, standing up and extending her hand. Laura, I replied, shaking her hand, it's good to see you. I was going to say the same thing, but you don't look good. What happened? It's a long story, I sighed and sat down opposite her. Laura stared at me with her sharp, focused gaze, as usual. Then tell me the short version. I gave a brief description of the situation. About Lisa, Carl, the poisoning, their disappearance. Paul, this is serious, she said after I finished. That's why I came to you. You can always tell when I've missed something. Laura leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. You know, I always thought your wife was beneath you. I said nothing. So, what do you want me to do? Her tone became businesslike. You know how Carl works. He has connections we can use. We need to find them. Laura, I need support. She smiled, her eyes sparkling with the excitement of battle. Paul Grayson needs support. It's important. Okay, you know I'll support you. We rented a small apartment in Berlin and began preparing. Laura worked steadily and quietly as usual. She collected data on Carl's activities and meetings and found several places where he might be hiding. The man is paranoid, she said, laying the map on the table. He has 3 hiding places in different parts of the city, but one of them was activated yesterday. So he's here. I nodded. Yes, but there's something else you need to know. He's not just hiding. He's planning something. Like what? I'm not sure, but his men have already started moving towards the eastern border. It doesn't sound like escape, more like preparing for something big. I looked at the map and thought for a moment. Laura, thank you for agreeing to help. I know I've dragged you into this. She looked at me and smiled slightly. Paul, you're always like this, never thinking of yourself, always protecting the people around you. To be honest, even if you hadn't asked me, I would have done the same. I met her gaze, and for a moment I felt a warm current penetrate the icy wall of anger and determination in my heart. But there was no time for sentimentality. Okay, I said, looking back at the map. Let's start with this hiding place. We have work to do. On the 3rd day of the search, Laura, who was sitting in front of the laptop, suddenly called out to me, Paul, you need to come and look at this. I walked over and looked over her shoulder at the screen, which displayed the encrypted data she had just decrypted. It was a correspondence between Lisa and Carl. Are you sure he doesn't suspect anything? Carl wrote, Of course. He thinks his chronic pain is just age-related. Paul never had any doubts in that regard. They'll take care of everything. The important thing is that you have the state documents ready, and the state awards he still has. They're worth millions. I froze. My awards, they're worth more than just money. They're the accolades for completing the most difficult tasks. Each one is a part of my soul. She knew what she was doing, I muttered. She's a brilliant actress. All along, she played the role of the devoted wife to keep me off guard. Laura frowned. Paul, she obviously planned this for a long time. There are more tapes here. They discuss how to transfer the money overseas after she gains access to your assets. I clenched my fists. She wants to destroy everything I have. Why? For the money? Laura looked at me. It's not just about the money, Paul. She sees you as a threat. For her, you're not a person. You're an obstacle. I looked away, trying to process what I'd heard. Meanwhile, Laura showed me another detail. Paul, this is not just about revenge. Carl has a much bigger plan. She showed me a map on the screen. It showed key infrastructure, power lines, water intakes, and a chemical warehouse. This is a network of facilities in Eastern Europe. I think Carl is preparing for major sabotage. If they blow up these facilities, the consequences will be catastrophic. Is this terrorism? I asked, a chill running down my spine. Maybe. Or it could be sabotage to cause chaos. Either way, it's on a huge scale. And Paul, he's got support. There are too many people involved. I sighed, realizing that things were escalating. We have to stop this from happening. Laura nodded. I've contacted our contacts, but you have to be at the heart of the operation. Later that night, after we had finished planning the first steps, Laura lingered by the window. I went over to her and noticed that she was staring out at the city in the night. What are you thinking about? I asked. How long it's been since we worked together, she said with a smile, and how well we've always worked together. Yes, I replied. She looked at me, and there was more than just friendly warmth in her gaze. Paul, I want you to know that I would do anything for you. You have always meant more to me than you realize. I was stunned. It was unexpected, but I couldn't help but feel that she was right. Something I had ignored for far too long. Laura, you don't have to say anything, she interrupted. Just know that I'm here to help you, even if it costs me everything. Her words echoed in my heart. I whispered, thank you. Laura and I spent the whole night preparing for the operation. Carl had chosen an old hideout in an abandoned industrial area. The place was perfect for surveillance, smuggling, and preparing the operation. We knew it wouldn't be an easy journey. At dawn, we arrived at our destination. The building was surrounded by a high metal fence, and armed men patrolled the perimeter. Using the thermal imager, we saw at least 10 guards. They're well prepared, Laura whispered, setting the thermal imaging camera down. Carl obviously knew you were coming to rescue him. That just makes things more interesting, I said, checking my equipment. We decided to enter through an old drainage pipe leading to the basement. Laura walked ahead of us, her movements fluid and confident. She had always been an excellent agent, quick-thinking, precise, and utterly reliable. Once we're in, the most important thing is to find Carl and his files, she said as we made our way through the dark corridor. He's obviously not just hiding. He's up to something big. I nodded, gripping the silenced pistol in my hand. We reached the narrow staircase leading to the first floor. Laura stopped and motioned for me to follow her. I knew she was prepared to back me up at all costs. The first floor was full of crates filled with equipment and weapons. We made our way between the crates until we heard a noise. "They're starting the operation in 2 days," said one guard. "Carl hopes everything goes well." "What if someone tries to intervene?" asked the other guard. "Carl said he has a plan for that. No one will interfere." I looked at Laura, and she nodded. We emerged from our hiding place at the same time. 2 precise shots rang out, and the guards fell to the ground. "Clean," she whispered, looking around. On the table were maps and documents. I grabbed them and leafed through them. "They plan to attack the chemical warehouse and cause mass poisoning," I said. "This is sabotage on a national scale." Laura frowned. "We must find Carl immediately. He is the key to all this." We went up to the second floor, where the control center was located. The door was ajar, and I heard a familiar voice. "They're coming. I can feel it," Carl was saying to someone. I signaled Laura to get ready. We both charged in at the same time. "Paul," Carl said, smiling at me, "you came. I was just beginning to miss you." "Cut the crap, Carl. You lost," I said, pointing the gun at him. "Are you sure?" His eyes sparkled. "I had all the advantages. All you had was anger." Just then, Laura noticed one of his men walking towards her with a gun. She fired first, but the man returned fire, sending her reeling backwards. "Laura!" I rushed to her, feeling everything inside me turn upside down. She was lying on the ground, breathing heavily. The bullet had hit the bulletproof vest, but it had caused her serious damage. "I'm fine," she gasped. "Go get him, Paul." Carl seized the opportunity and ran out the back door. "Laura, stay here." "I'll be back," I said, meeting her gaze. "Paul, you mean a lot to me," she said, gripping my hand. I nodded, feeling that simple acknowledgement more profound than I could have imagined. "They'll pay," I repeated, then caught up to Carl. Crossing the deserted corridors was unexpectedly difficult. Every step hurt, but not from the wounds. It was the thoughts that suddenly flooded my mind. Laura! Her name echoed in my head over and over again. She was always there for me, even when I didn't notice. She supported me, stood by me, and did everything she could to keep me going. And now, lying on the ground after the shooting, she was still insisting that I keep going and finish what I started. I suddenly realized that Laura was the only one who had been loyal to me to the end. She wasn't doing it for the benefits or the status, but for something greater. For me, a feeling of respect and gratitude suddenly welled up in me, and I almost stumbled as I ran through the dark corridor. "Laura, you deserve better than me. I won't let Carl get away with this. I won't let our efforts go to waste." I stormed into the hall. Carl was there too. Lisa stood in the middle, a smug smile on her face. She looked flawless. The black dress emphasized her figure. Her hair was immaculately coiffed, but her eyes, cold and piercing, exposed everything. "Hello, Paul," she said mockingly. Carl stood next to her, arms crossed over his chest. "Welcome, old friend. You took your time getting here." I slowly raised my gun and aimed it at Carl. "This is the end, Carl." He grinned, as if I had said something funny. "Are you sure, Paul? Look at yourself. It's pathetic. You have nothing left to fight for." Shut up, I growled, turning my gaze to Lisa. And you. I still don't understand how I could have been so blind. She snorted and crossed her arms. Blind, Paul? You've always been blind. You think your pathetic heroics and all those awards mean something? You're nothing. You're nothing. And with me, you're somebody. Is that what you call being somebody? I asked, holding back my anger. Poisoning your own husband? Why, Lisa? For the money? She laughed mockingly. Money, power, all the things you could never give me. You were always the weak one, Paolo. You never even saw me playing with you, like you eating from my hand. You played, I said, looking her in the eye coldly. And you think you won? I know I won, she said, stepping closer. Look at you, a tired, pathetic old man, still trying to play the hero. That's enough, I snapped. Her smile faded, but she continued. You should have left everything to me, Paul. I was your best chance. And now, I interrupted, clenching my fists. You have nothing. No money, no power, no respect. You are nothing to me, Lisa. Decrepit, greedy, weak. She froze for a moment, then looked at Carl angrily. Kill him, Carl. Do it. Carl raised his gun, but I was faster. One shot, and his gun flew out of his hand. He screamed in pain and clutched his injured arm. Paul, he began, but I was already walking towards him and pressed the gun against his forehead. You've lost, Carl. You won't do it, he gasped. Try it, I said, glaring at Lisa. She took a few steps back, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. Lisa realized that the situation had gotten out of hand. Her face contorted as I got closer, and she turned and ran for the door. You won't get far, I said between clenched teeth, knocking Carl to the ground with my knee. He groaned, but remained on the ground, clutching his injured arm. Lisa ran, but her high heels slipped on the metal stairs. I grabbed her arm at the exit. Let go of me, she screamed, trying to break free. No, Lisa, you stay. We're going to show everyone who you really are. She tried to hit me, but I grabbed her arm and forced her to turn towards me. You've always been weak, Lisa. You thought money and power could hide that? No, now everyone will know who you are. I dragged her back to Carl. He tried to stand up, but fell to his knees and cursed at me. Paul, you're not going to get anywhere doing this, he said, breathing heavily. I'll accomplish one thing, Carl, I replied coldly. They'll let everyone know what a traitor looks like. As I began tying Lisa to Carl, Lisa screamed and tried to break free. Paul, you can't. You've never done this before, she screamed, pulling hard on her arms, but the ropes were already tied tightly around her wrists. Carl waved his hands angrily, but each movement only tightened the knot. Paul, damn it, he hissed, looking up at me. I grinned and tested the strength of the bindings. Damn it, I taunted Carl. Don't you understand? You asked for this. When they were both tied up, I dragged them over to a huge metal hook hanging from the ceiling. A few minutes later, they were suspended in a humiliating position. Carl was tied to the rope, head towards the ceiling, and Lisa was hanging upside down over him, face pressed against his groin. Both were half naked, which made the sight even more absurd. You're crazy, Lisa gasped, as I pulled them higher. Maybe, I replied calmly, pulling her hair away from her angry face. But you know, Lisa, this is nothing compared to how depraved you've become. Carl let out a hiss, but just shook harder, making the position even more interesting. Polly, he began, but I raised my hand to stop him. Carl, if I were you, I'd hold my breath. Your allies won't be helping you anytime soon. I took out a can of spray paint and wrote in large letters on the wall above their heads. Asterisk traitors always end up in disgrace. Asterisk. I took a step back, assessed the result, and nodded with satisfaction. Paul, let's go. You'll pay for this. Lisa screamed again, but her voice was almost hysterical. You know what, Lisa? You were right. I have paid the price, with years of lies, betrayal, and pain. Now it's your turn. I switched on the beacon on my watch to let the agents know where to find them. As I left, I heard Lisa continue to scream while Carl remained silent, except for the occasional low moan. When the agents arrived, one of them noticed the scene and whistled. Grayson, that was Art. You really are a master of the finale. The other agent laughed, taking a picture of the writing on the wall. I hope this makes it into the report. I remained silent, taking one last look at the two traitors, now suspended in midair like puppets, the absurdity of it all. I stopped, looked up at the sky, which was beginning to lighten. This is the end for them, I thought. But for me, it's the beginning of a new phase. This time, I know who's by my side. Laura was waiting by the car. Her eyes were worried, but she smiled when I approached. Ready? She asked. I nodded. Now, it's just the beginning. After the operation, it took me months to sort out the aftermath. The documents Laura and I found in Carl's safe were crucial. They contained information on corrupt schemes, international connections, and even plans for national sabotage. I handed over all the documents to the relevant authorities, but made sure some of the details were kept confidential. In this way, Carl and his network were completely destroyed and could not be rebuilt. Lisa found herself facing the full force of the law. She was arrested for attempted murder, financial fraud, and complicity in terrorism. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. Carl, meanwhile, was exhausted and discredited. He agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence, but his life was ruined. My life changed after these events. Laura and I became closer than ever. We settled in a small house outside the city. Laura had always dreamed of a quiet life, and I realized that I wanted the same. Her love of plants eventually became a true art form. She would spend hours in the garden, creating stunning arrangements that seemed like a world away. I would find her at work, sometimes with dirty hands, but always happy and smiling. Don't you ever rest? I asked her once, as I watched her plant new flowers. This is my rest, Paul, she answered, shaking her hands. And you? When will you start enjoying life? I think I already have, I replied, sitting down next to her. We sat together in the evenings by the fireplace, chatting. Laura was a remarkable conversationalist, intelligent, kind, and full of a great sense of humor. I was inspired by her outlook on the world and her desire to see the best in people. You've changed my life, I said one day as we looked at the stars. You too, Paul, she replied. I guess we just met at the right time. We became a team, not only in life, but also in helping others. Together, we created a small charity to help those who, like me, have suffered misfortune through crime. Our home became a place of warmth, joy, and understanding. Laura continued to tend the garden, and I learned to cherish every minute I spent with her. We proved that it is possible to find love, happiness, and meaning even after betrayal and pain. The most important thing is to hold on to your principles and believe in the good. Every conversation we had and every night we spent together made me realize that I had finally found a home.